Wikipedia. Not to be confused with our article on the Book of Exodus. This article examines the young earth creationist and biblical literalist claims regarding the historical reality of the exodus of the Hebrew people from Egypt, as well as the evidence relating to such claims. Mainstream history and archaeology now consider the Exodus to not have happened in the manner described in the Bible, and the story to be a narrative put together between the 8th and 5th centuries BCE, based on earlier oral traditions and collective memories possibly dating as far back as the 13th century BCE. Christian and Jewish literalists do not accept this. A detailed examination of the innumerable issues raised by the fringe Velikovsky and Roll alternate chronologies is beyond the scope of this article, and will not be attempted here. I'm not trying to say that, now, I have proven that the Bible is authoritative, is historically accurate, of course not. You still have to have faith. Mainstream scholarly consensus. Despite being regarded in Judaism as the primary factual historical narrative of the origin of the religion, culture and ethnicity, Exodus is now accepted by scholars as having been compiled in the 8th–7th centuries BCE from stories dating possibly as far back as the 13th century BCE, with further polishing in the 6th–5th centuries BCE, as a theological and political manifesto to unite the Israelites in the then current battle for territory against Egypt. Archaeologists from the 19th century onward were actually surprised not to find any evidence whatsoever for the events of Exodus. By the 1970s, archaeologists had largely given up regarding the Bible as any use at all as a field guide. The archaeological evidence of local Canaanite, rather than Egyptian, origins of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel is overwhelming, and leaves no room for an exodus from Egypt or a 40-year pilgrimage through the Sinai wilderness. The culture of the earliest Israelite settlements is Canaanite, their cult objects are of the Canaanite god El, the pottery is in the local Canaanite tradition, and the alphabet is early Canaanite. Almost the sole marker distinguishing Israelite villages from Canaanite sites is an absence of pig bones. William Dever, an archaeologist normally associated with the more conservative end of Syro-Palestinian archaeology, has labeled the question of the historicity of Exodus dead. Israeli archaeologist Ze'ev Herzog provides his view on the historicity of the Exodus. The Israelites never were in Egypt. They never came from abroad. This whole chain is broken. It is not a historical one. It is a later legendary reconstruction, made in the 7th century BCE, of a history that never happened. Professor of Ancient History and Archaeology Eric H. Klein Wikipedia's W.SVG also summarizes the scholarly consensus in his book Biblical Archaeology, a very short introduction, published by Oxford University Press and winner of the 2011 Biblical Archaeology Society's Best Popular Book on Archaeology. Despite attempts by a number of biblical archaeologists, and an even larger number of amateur enthusiasts, over the years, credible direct archaeological evidence for the Exodus has yet to be found. While it can be argued that such evidence would be difficult to find, since nomads generally do not leave behind permanent installations, archaeologists have discovered and excavated nomadic emplacements from other periods in the Sinai Desert. So if there were archaeological remains to be found from the Exodus, one would have expected them to be found by now. And yet thus far there is no trace of the biblical 600,000 men on foot, besides children plus a mixed crowd, and livestock in great numbers Exod 12:37–38 who wandered for 40 years in the desert. We have so much evidence that we are the true biblical Hebrews that we cannot be persuaded. Like this, for example, Elisée Reclus in his book The Earth and Its Inhabitants, Africa, which you can find on Google and Amazon, he said the kingdom of Judah was in West Africa and that the people were said to be Jews. Now this man was not just some regular man writing a book, he was a renowned French geographer and was professor of comparative geography at the Univ of Brussels from 1895 to 1905. That is to say, this man knew what he was talking about. He's not the only one. We have writings from the Europeans, Africans and Arabs who all say the same thing. It shouldn't be a surprise, as this confirms the scriptures of Deuteronomy chapter 28, specifically Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 48, Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 68 and Luke chapter 21 verse 24. The Ashkenazi Jews are a new invention that fits none of the biblical prophecies but two, and they are Revelation chapter 2 verse 9 and Revelation chapter 3 verse 9. So the Bible says that Judah would go into worldwide slavery, and here from this book and the maps also of that area during that time that it just so happens a tribe in West Africa called Judah located directly on the slave coast went into worldwide slavery. Coincidence? I think not. Black people in America and around the world who are descended from the transatlantic slave trade, you are the tribe of Judah, the true biblical Hebrews. Search on Google how long you need from Egypt to the Middle East. Of course, 3,000 years ago there were no vehicles, in the desert no roads and no navigation system. Therefore, the Israelites could not make the shortest route from Egypt to Canaan, as on a modern transit route. Instead, they traveled as nomads on foot or with camels crisscrossing their tents. According to tradition, they remained in some places for a long time. There they experienced many things, even those that made them doubt if God really existed. Shortly before the end of the journey, almost all of them lost their lives. Then Moses sent 12 spies into the land that the Israelites were to take. Upon their return, 10 of them told of huge people and intimidated the Israelites into wanting to be scared and turn back. Only Joshua and Caleb appealed to trust God. But the people did not listen to the two. They refused to fight for the promised land, cursing Moses, Joshua, and Caleb, and even nearly stoned the ambassadors. Thereupon God decided to let all who doubted him die in the wilderness. It takes 6 days from Cairo, Egypt to today's so-called Israel on foot, 9 hours by car. How can the children of Israel have wandered around the desert for 40 years? Israel is in Africa, science is a cult and hates the Bantu Africans, the white scientists and today's Ashkenazim lie to the world. They have created a new Israel in Africa and they called it the Middle East. The Bible does speak about 2 Jerusalems in the scriptures, but the one is in bondage in Arabia and the other one, that is the mother of us all, is free. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smootest the river, take in thine hand. And go. Exodus chapter 17 verse 5. Thus saith the Lord, In this thou shalt know that I am the Lord, behold, I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. Exodus chapter 7 verse 17. And the border shall fetch a compass from Asmon unto the river of Egypt, and the goings out of it shall be at the sea. Numbers chapter 34 verse 5. Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. 5 Macc 2.11-17. He also on that day set free every captive which was found in Egypt, of the tribe of Judah and of Benjamin, that they might return to their 12 own country, Syria. The number of them was 13, about 130,000. Moreover, he ordered money to be distributed among them, so that several denarii came to the share of each person, who, receiving these, departed into 14 their own land. Then he commanded a great table to be made of the purest gold, which should be large enough to contain a representation of the whole land of Egypt, and a picture of the Nile, from the commencement of its stream to the end of it in Egypt, with its various divisions through 15 the country, and how it laves the whole land. He also ordered the table to be set with many precious 16 stones. And this table was made, and its carving was finished, and it was set with precious stones, and it was carried into the city of Jerusalem, a 17 present to the magnificent house. And, arriving in safety, it was placed in the house, according to 18 the king's command. And truly men never beheld its like, for the beauty of the pictures, and the excellence of the workmanship. A land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack any thing in it, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayest dig brass. Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 9. When ye go, ye shall come unto a people secure, and to a large land, for Yah hath given it into your hands, a place where there is no want of anything that is in the earth. Judges chapter 18 verse 10. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. But Jerusalem which is above is free, which is the mother of us all. Psalm 50-10. We passed the land of the Sudanese and Somalians. The children of the ancient Egyptians will be no more, they will be forgotten. But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness, they walked not in my statutes, and they despised my judgments, which if a man do, he shall even live in them, and my Sabbaths they greatly polluted. Then I said, I would pour out my fury upon them in the wilderness, to consume them. 14 But I wrought for my name, Sake, that it should not be polluted before the heathen, in whose sight I brought them out. 15 Yet also I lifted up my hand unto them in the wilderness, that I would not bring them into the land which I had given them, flowing with milk and honey, which is the glory of all lands. Ezekiel chapter 20 verses 13-15. 49. Then you kept in existence two living creatures, one you called 50. Behemoth, and the name of the other was Leviathan. And you separated one from the other, for the seventh part where the water had been gathered together could not hold them. 51. Both. And you gave Behemoth one of the parts that had been dried up on the third day, to live in it, where there are 1,000 mountains. Why Rwanda is called the land of 1,000 hills and mountains, it's amazing for this scenic little country. The mountains are more magnificent than that of Virunga, volcanoes in the northwest, and in the bamboo forests in the world's last mountain gorillas in the world. Kigali is the capital city of Rwanda. But to Leviathan you gave the seventh part, the watery part. And you have kept them to be eaten by whom you wish, and when you wish. On the sixth day you commanded the earth to bring forth before you cattle, wild animals, and creeping things. And over these you placed Adam, as ruler over all the works that you had made, and from him we have all come, the people whom you have chosen. Both the crocodile and the hippopotamus were animals that could be dangerous to humans and at that time could hardly be tamed or even killed by them. In addition, they live on or in large bodies of water, in which, according to the former opinion, the chaos lived, which alone could put God in his place. No wonder, then, that both the crocodile and the hippopotamus were understood early on as personifications of this chaos power. And the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, Take thy rod, and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood. And that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood, and in vessels of stone. Exodus chapter 7 verse 19. The Exodus happened, but they have crossed the Nile River. They have passed the Gihon River. And the name of the second river is Gihon, the same as it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. Genesis chapter 2 verse 13. Who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents, and scorpions, and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint? Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 15. Psalm chapter 107 verse 4. They wandered in the wilderness in a solitary way, they found no city to dwell in. Psalm chapter 107 verse 40. He poureth contempt upon princes, and causeth them to wander in the wilderness, where there is no way. Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 19. And when we departed from Horeb, we went through all that great and terrible wilderness, which ye saw by the way of the mountain of the Amorites, as the Lord our God commanded us, and we came to Kadesh Barnea. And the Lord anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was consumed. Numbers chapter 32 verse 13. Genesis chapter 15 verse 18. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. 2 Chronicles chapter 33 verse 14. Now after this he built a wall without the city of David, on the west side of Gihon, in the valley, even to the entering in at the fish gate, and compassed about Ophel, and raised it up a very great height, and put captains of war in all the fenced cities of Judah. 2 Kings chapter 8:21 Zer as Judah. 2 Chronicles chapter 32 verse 30 This same Hezekiah also stopped the upper watercourse of Gihon, and brought it straight down to the west side of the city of David. And Hezekiah prospered in all his works. Bantu migration. When Bantus came to Africa, they controlled West, Central, East and Southern Africa. They took all the forest to pygmies to avoid the spreading of Islam. Those from the west joined Bantu Gala in the forest to shield against Muslims. And they called themselves Bar Congolo in DRC. Bantus also called themselves Yahounds. Yahud Aramaic. Hebrew, meaning Judah, which is the same capital of Cameroon today. Yahoundé. Most of the tribes in Zambian and southern Africa can trace their roots from West and East Africa. Most of the tribes kept the Samba Shabbat, which is still being practiced in Brazil and Cuba. Others have kept the circumcision of males among African tribes, others lost the tradition. Most of them were killed if they kept Shabbat. Bantus were also given a title by the Muslims as the people of the book. This is because the Arabs started trading in slaves 1,000 years before the European slave trade. Hence, informed the Portuguese about the people of the book, a people cursed by God and predestined as slaves. Deuteronomy chapter 28, 15-68. The Muslims also called the Western Sudan Yahud, which means the lost tribes of Israel. These Hebrews were also led captive into many African nations by many indigenous tribes on the west and east coast of Africa. Some were sold on the basis of losing in a war. Tribesmen would sell Hebrews directly to Europeans and Muslims. The word Congolo, ancient Kungelo, is derived from two Hebrew words. In this case, we have kun, meaning established, and gelo, or golo, means exile. Today it is called Congo. 95-99 of Bayithu or Bantu slaves came from the following places along the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. 1. Zanji land or Zanzibar in Tanzania is one of the first places where slaves came through, and more accuracy is needed to determine the percentage. 2. Congo Drive in Angola 39.4%. 1. Southeast Africa Mozambique and Madagascar 4.7%. 2. Nigeria Delta, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea and Gabon Bantu slaves 14.6%. Senegal and Gambia 4.8%. Guinea, Guinea-Bissau and Sierra Leone 4.1%. Liberia and Ivory Coast 1.8%. Gold Coast, Ghana and Ivory Coast 10.4%.